and then we can actually get started. Okay, so welcome and thanks for coming. We're happy to answer any questions you have throughout this process. This is new to us, and I'll give you a little bit of background about how we shifted from a comprehensive exam process to a portfolio process. Just to kind of give a little bit of an overview about what we're going to do, I'm going to do some quick introductions just to let you know who's here for our program. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background of what we did, what we were struggling with, and why we moved to a portfolio, because the background was important as well in terms of why we wanted to do this. And then we took some time to actually develop the portfolio and really think about what we wanted to measure. And that's where CAS really comes in, and that's where it guided us. I'm also going to share what process we have adopted for evaluating student work and reflections. And then I'm happy to say that we have a recent graduate with us who I'll introduce in just a second. And she's going to share her perspective on what it was like going through this portfolio process and being the guinea pig class that went through it for the first time. And then I'll share some things that we learned from the faculty perspective, and I'll also invite some colleagues of mine who I'll introduce in just a second to share their perspectives as well, anything else I'd like to add, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Okay, so some quick introductions. I'm an associate professor at Sam Houston State University. I did serve as a program coordinator at one point, and during that time we discussed quite a bit about why our comprehensive exams weren't turning out the way we wanted them to. The results just weren't reflecting what we thought they should. We also have Brenda Johnson, who is the recent graduate from our program. She's an admissions counselor at Johnson & Wales University in North Carolina. And we do have an online program, so it's a fully online master's program, 36 hours, traditional higher ed, admin, a lot of the same classes that all of you have as well, but just in an online format. So most of our students are working full-time, somewhere mostly in higher education, sometimes in the K-12 environment, and they tend to be a little older. So let me give you a little bit of background of what we were struggling with and kind of the things that we were weighing. We had a lot of challenges with comprehensive exams. We've been using them for several years, a lot of years, most of the program. And we went back and forth between like questions that we could use, as well as case studies that they would respond to. For the last several years, we've been using a case study approach where the students would get 2 different case studies and they would be asked to write a comprehensive response to that case study using several different areas that we were looking for. A lot of the outcomes, applying the research and scholarly perspective, looking at student development, multicultural and diversity, inclusion issues, those big encompassing outcomes that we're all kind of looking for. They had to incorporate that into their comprehensive exam response. What we were finding, though, is that the students were very anxious about this very high stakes exam. If they don't pass the exam, they don't get to graduate, even though they've maybe performed well on the courses. And so that was not something that we liked either. We don't like putting our students under a lot of high anxiety. So we weren't happy with the high stakes approach. We also found very consistently that the class performance, what we saw student work as in the classroom, did not equate to what they gave us for their exam performance. Some students did very well in the exam, other students did not do so well at all, and we had to go back and forth with them. We have our exam process was set up where we had rewrite opportunities, and we would have several that would have to go back and rewrite. And sometimes it was mainly writing skills and APA, but there was also some substantive issues that we were having that they weren't quite giving us what we asked for in terms of the outcomes that we wanted to see. And so we'd have to get them to go and improve responses, wide variety of exam results, even though our students were performing very well in classes. We also needed better longitudinal data for the very reason that our exam responses were all over the place consistently. We were trying to measure outcomes. How well are we doing? And we were having a harder time finding out what is it that we're doing wrong? You know, can we add some more to a class? Well, we would try that, and some things would get better down the road, but then other things would pop up, and we would have to go back and look at our curriculum again and said, where are we covering these issues? How can we do this better? And so we weren't getting a good way to measure our outcomes. We're also looking at program review. How do we prove after 6 years that we are doing what we say we're doing? And so we were looking for better data as well. The portfolio, we went back and forth about how to do this. You know, how do we measure the different outcomes that we have and meet our goals? And we finally decided, you know, that we needed to make this leap into portfolios. It met everything that we were looking for. So we had lower stakes and lower anxiety for the students. We also had an opportunity for the students to show us what they've already done in the program. So we had documenting learning, and we also could apply what they were learning. So again, a lot of our students are actually working full time, and we would allow them to talk about how they were actually using the classroom information directly into their jobs. We also got to ask them about, what do you want to do? What do you want to accomplish with this information? How do you see this playing out over time? So it was a flexible and adaptable process for us, and we decided that we really needed to head that way. So with the portfolio development, when we first started the process, we collected examples of different programs who shared that freely in either listserv opportunities or online in their websites. And we looked at how they were doing things, and just to get an idea of what our preferences were and what kind of methods were out there. We also compared different standards, and this was an area that we kind of dove into for a while, because we know we have CAS and we also have CACREP accreditation that people use. And so we wanted to look at both and give them the best balance approach that we could and see which one really suited our needs. We have, and since the beginning of the program, been using CAS, but we also wanted to make sure that that was really what we wanted as a faculty group. We decided that really was what we wanted to stick with, that it really applied to what we were doing. We also understand that CACREP is having some challenges from the higher ed perspective. Some programs are not as happy with CACREP as they used to be. So we also wanted to stay away from that and go with something that was very specifically tailored to higher education. And so what we decided to go with was the 7 primary outcomes that CAS has for the master's curriculum. So these are what students should be able to know and do at the end of the curriculum. And they come from the foundational and professional studies outcomes that are listed in CAS. I won't go over those. I know a lot of you already have access to those. And correct me if I'm wrong, Gavin, but I don't think we actually changed any of the outcomes themselves in terms of the newest guidelines for the curriculum.
No, there are some revisions, and we broadened it a little bit, but they're essentially the same areas and outcomes.
Yeah, so the outcomes remain the same. So that is not changing. So we use the very same outcomes that you'll see in the newest version of the standards. So when we introduce the portfolio to students, and I'll get to the process in a few minutes, but I wanted to kind of back up and tell you how students learn about this, because we are still in the middle of trying to transition. We've only done this for 1 semester, so now we're in the 2nd semester of doing this. So we have students who graduate every semester. And so we're trying to both capture the students who have been with us for a while and kind of change their expectations of having a comprehensive exam at the end to now having a portfolio, as well as welcoming our new students and introducing this portfolio idea from the very beginning. And so when they first arrive with us, the very first semester, and anyone who is not graduating, so continuing students. We first introduced it during orientation. And so we've had 2 different sessions that have introduced this idea now for 2 different semesters. And then periodically we'll offer an overview session. It doesn't go into a lot of details about the exact tasks to do to submit, but it does talk about identifying artifacts, saving them, talking about what we're going to be looking for in terms of their learning and their outcome reflections. And then when we get to the semester that students are supposed to be graduating, we ask them to attend an actual portfolio session that talks about preparing and submitting their documents. So again, we're trying to prepare students to both start saving things as well as thinking about their learning from the very beginning of the program, and kind of making sure that they're ready for it when they get to the very end. So here's what we're asking for in order to meet these 7 outcomes from CAS that we've identified for our program. We do ask for a resume, and we do actually give feedback on the resume as well, but we want artifacts and reflection statements for every outcome. The reflection statements are 3 pages or less, and we do have some guidelines there, which I'll get to in a second. So artifacts can be used up to 2 outcomes. So you can use the same paper, for instance, for 2 of the outcomes, but the reflections can only be used once. So there needs to be a unique reflection for every single outcome that we have. Reflections themselves need to address how the artifact demonstrates their learning, how learning has been or will be applied professionally, because we do have some students who are not working in higher education or perhaps are not working at all. So we want to make sure that they're included in that perspective of the reflection. And then how students will continue building the competencies. That part was important to us too, because we want to engage them with, this doesn't stop as soon as you earn your master's degree. We want you to understand and plan for the ability to continue your learning professionally. Artifacts themselves, we wanted to have a wide variety because our students do a lot of different things, and we try to be creative in our classes. And so we're looking for a lot of different artifacts that demonstrate learning. So they can be papers, presentations, podcasts, infographics, book reviews, poster session materials, practicum work products if they're done in time, because a lot of them are taking the practicum in that same semester. And then if they have something else, they can ask for pre-approval ahead of time. They'll show us what they're considering, and we can say yes or no at that point. So we're open to whatever artifacts they believe can demonstrate their learning, but something like a discussion board post, one of them is not going to be a good idea. We want something a little bit more thorough than that. The evaluation process we're using, we have a faculty advisor assigned to each student. So we have across the board, all of the faculty who teach in our program, full-time faculty that is, are assigned to a student. So depending on how many students we have graduating, we may have 1, we may have several. So the first pilot semester that we went through, we only had, I think, 6 students who went through it, which was great for a pilot semester. This semester, I think we have over 30, like 34 students graduating, so it's going to be a little bit more on the workload. But everybody has a faculty advisor to kind of work with. And they give us drafts about what they're thinking. So they send us an artifact and also a reflection about that artifact and say, are we doing this right? Are we on the right page? So as faculty, we'll give them some feedback on those drafts and also the resume. We'll take a look at their resume at that point too and say, okay, here's are the things that we would like to see you address. The final materials are due into our portfolio system 3 weeks before the end of the term. So we can do one final formal review from the faculty advisor. And then we do have a second faculty reviewer just for a quality check to make sure that we're not just, letting people slip through. There are 2 rewrite opportunities. So those formal documents that they submit 3 weeks before the end of the term, we want to make sure that if there was any glaring errors, they still have a chance to fix it before we consider it final and make that, I guess, final grade, if you will, final pass-fail of the portfolio system, because we have to have that for our institution. We have to have a culminating experience of some sort that would qualify kind of as an exam. That's in our university policies. So for portfolio submission, we are using a particular software called TK20. It is already used by our teacher prep program. So about 80% of our programs in the College of Education where we're housed already use this system because of state mandated data collection and certification that they have for teachers. And so we already had an existing software that we just needed to learn how to adapt it to what we needed. It already connects with our learning management system. So for an online program, that's very important to us. So we have Blackboard Learn, and we can use a TK20 assignment like we would a paper assignment or a presentation assignment. The students just go in and it looks like any other assignment upload, and they just upload it, but instead of going to Blackboard, it goes straight into the TK20 system. So they don't have to log into 2 different systems to upload their documents. TK20 also allows us to do both short-term and long-term reports, which is obviously helpful for program reviews and any assessment work that we're doing. Plus, it builds an archive of student work that we can tap into for whatever we need to assess it for in the future. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Brenna and ask her to share her experience. I don't know what she's going to say. I kind of guided her on some of the things that you might want to hear, but I told her it's open season, and whatever she thinks, good or bad, she's allowed to say it. So Brenna, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can share what you learned through the process.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything bad to say. I'll just go ahead and start off with that. Overall, I had a great experience. I think it was a good culmination experience that kind of helped tie everything that we had learned together. I think depending how long you go through the program, some of your initial courses can be 2 years ago. And so having the opportunity to reflect back and really dive into that work that you've done previously was a good opportunity to kind of refresh those concepts and just kind of tie it all together. So the TK20, I will say that was very easy to use. It was super simple upload. I don't know what other programs are out there, but that one was very easy. And I don't have experience with a comprehensive exam, so I can't comment on that, but I do appreciate the fact that this allowed us to work on it throughout the whole semester. Since I was the first class that utilized the portfolio, we were kind of told last minute. That was the only negative aspect. I think it was like early September that we were told about it. And so a little bit of an adjustment there, but having those 15 weeks to work on those assignments was definitely crucial. I think the final semester with the practicum experience and obviously all of your final assignments and everything can be stressful. And so not having one specific week where I needed to focus on that comprehensive exam helped me significantly. So like I said, the only negative was that last minute change switching over from the comprehensive exam, but I think that you guys handled it very well, instructed us pretty clearly. The only thing is, I think, like I said, since it was kind of last minute, the instruction was a little bit vague. Obviously the learning outcomes are pretty standard, and so you guys didn't shift those too much, but having a little bit more direction would have been beneficial. Obviously we are master's level students, but possibly seeing some samples from other programs that you guys had looked at just to kind of have a little bit of direction would have been a little bit helpful as well. So for me, the most challenging part was trying to identify artifacts. Throughout my program, I didn't have anything categorized. I wasn't necessarily saving things in a way that made it easy to find. And so kind of scrambling and looking through everything to see what touched on what subjects was challenging. And then trying to keep everything different. I know I mentioned to Dr. Holzweiss that I wanted to try to keep the reflections all pretty distinct. But that does get a little bit difficult when you're trying to kind of repeat the same questions and answer the same questions throughout each of those. Let's see. I also think making sure that your faculty advisor is accessible is important. I know Dr. Holzweiss was very easy to get a hold of and was very responsive. I spoke with some other students, one in particular who did have trouble getting in touch with her advisor. And so I think that kind of set her back a little bit. Obviously, faculty are very busy people, and especially I think with this coming semester with having more than one student each is going to be a little difficult, but just making sure that you're quick to respond and answer those questions I think is important. And then I did want to touch on how I chose my artifacts because I thought that might be helpful. So the first thing I kind of looked at was any standout projects that I had done throughout the program. So obviously any major research papers or podcast assignments, those were kind of easy to identify from the start. So quickly identified those. There were some other ones though. I think the foundational outcomes, that one is kind of a broad area. And so that was the most difficult one for me to locate something that I felt related enough to work. And I think that also was kind of a struggle, is making sure that your artifacts relate in a strong enough way that you can actually see the correlation there. And then as far as writing the reflections, I kind of devised a thought process to help me dictate what I was doing. So initially I addressed why I picked the artifacts. I thought that was important to kind of help link what the outcome was and then why I thought that artifact connected to it. And then I also touched on what the goal of the assignment was and how it was relevant to the course, just because I thought that, again, tied the program outcomes into the actual work that we were doing. And then I also talked a little bit about how I actually did the assignment. So what I researched, what I prepared, and then obviously what I learned from that specific assignment. And then like she mentioned earlier, obviously addressing how I plan to apply those concepts. I think my initial draft, I kind of was a little soft on that aspect. And so after some feedback, moving forward, I really enhanced that area. So how I plan to apply it, had I done anything at my workplace to kind of implement those concepts yet? If not, how was I going to? And then what was my plan moving forward? Obviously, we're done with courses, but then you still have to continue learning and developing professionally. And so how am I going to take those concepts and move forward with them? The resume part, I really appreciated that aspect. We obviously, in our practicum, we also worked on our resumes, and so we had already had some feedback from that. But Dr. Holzweiss added some more specifics in there, so actually like tangible numbers and things, and then adding a bit more technical skills. I think throughout the program we worked on a lot of different skills that maybe I hadn't used before, so podcast assignments, video editing, things like that. And so obviously that is helpful in the workplace, and so adding that onto the resume was something I hadn't really thought about, but I think that is a good point. So those are kind of my thoughts. I don't know if I kind of touched on everything that is helpful or not, but overall it was definitely a good experience. I think having this done at the end of the program really prepared me for interviews and kind of getting out there and really highlighting what I'd learned and what my specific skill set was. I did just switch jobs, and so I had all that fresh information to kind of take with me to interviews and really highlight, hey, these are my specific skills, this is what I've learned, this is how I can apply it to this position. So I think it was a really great experience, and hopefully other students felt the same way.
I hope so too. Thank you, Brenna. I know she's available to answer questions when we're done too, so I appreciate her experience and sharing that. There's some things that we kind of knew too, but it's always good to get that feedback about, some of the things that we struggle with, especially when we're trying to implement a new program. So let me give you a little bit from the faculty perspective and kind of what we learned overall. When we were doing kind of that initial orientation session for our students who were graduating, introducing this is all brand new, we're trying to figure out, they're trying to figure it out. And so I wrote down when we were doing that session what kind of questions they were asking. that we didn't necessarily cover very well, I guess, or that they wanted more information on. And so they wanted to know, what is a good artifact? How do I obtain artifacts I did not keep? So that's obviously a transition issue, especially if we're trying to catch them at the beginning and they start the program. You know, if we're telling them to keep those artifacts and note them somewhere, then they have a better opportunity to kind of record them appropriately in the file names and maybe put them in a special folder. Does the artifact have to be an A assignment? I loved this one. I had one student who, or we had one student who asked, you know, what if this artifact doesn't reflect my best work, but I really learned something from it? We loved that. We said, yes, use the artifact that does not equate to an A assignment and tell us why you want to go back and change it and improve it and what you learned from that process. And we did have a student that asked if she should make improvements to the artifact. I said, don't touch it. You know, it was a paper, and she said, I got all sorts of feedback about things that I needed to make sure I do the next time, and should I go back and fix those things? And I said, don't. You know, we don't want you to fix them. We want you to tell us why you want to fix them. You know, and so going a little bit deeper into that reflection piece. They were also asking if the artifact could be from a group projects. We do a lot of those as well in our program. So, you know, I think with those, you would have to make sure that you're reflecting on what pieces you did and what contributions you made to the group. So it's really focused on your learning. Some other things that we discovered when we got into the evaluation project or process part of it was that a lot of our feedback was including technical edits, so trying to fix APA, grammar, punctuation, the typical writing kinds of things, but making sure that they were really talking about the applied learning, you know, that piece that they're going to apply to their assistantships and their practica and their professional work experiences. How do they translate what they're learning from the classroom into their actual work environment? What their plan was to build competencies. A lot of the students forgot that piece. And then ways to tweak resumes. Brenda mentioned that I pointed out to her about the technical skills. I also heard back from other faculty that they had the same issue. With us being an online program, we have a lot of technical tools that we introduce students to, a lot of creativity that goes into some of these tech tools. And a lot of them are not putting that on their resume. And so we're catching it going, wait a minute, you know how to do this. This is a good work skill as well. And so mention that on your resume. So we're trying to catch some things that maybe they don't even see for themselves and make sure that they know how to sell themselves to an employer. Some of the concerns that we have are, of course, trying to help students identify the artifacts early, because we realized that trying to transition into this process for the students who are graduating was a little overwhelming. So we want to make sure students are prepared for that at the beginning and they get all sorts of guidance when they first start the program to begin looking for those artifacts that might help. And we've talked as a faculty about introducing that in our courses, saying, hey, this project might be good for your portfolio artifacts for this outcome, and making that connection for them that they can begin seeing which documents they might have produced for us could be a good learning experience to reflect back on. We're also concerned about faculty workload. We do believe in that mentorship piece and having an advising piece so that we're working with students before they submit. But obviously it does get overwhelming when you have more than 30 graduating. So we'll see how we handle that. We're still kind of tweaking that. All right, so before we get to questions, I want to introduce some of my colleagues who are also on the webinar and invite them to share any experiences that they had either with students or that they observed during this process. So Gabriela Silvestri is our current program coordinator. Rick Montalongo is one of our faculty members, and Forrest Lane is also a previous program coordinator. So I will invite them to chime in, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see their lovely faces.
Dr. Sylvester, you go. Oh, no, thank you so much. And the whole idea of having the opportunity for us to reflect upon implementing for the first time the experience, we did an informal exchange among the colleagues, but everything that Brenna mentioned, and I'm so grateful she did, are things that we thought and discussed about. In my experience and previous experiences in being in graduate programs that also were using portfolios is the fact of starting to have the students get the artifacts ready before, specifically to me, even last semester, as I was teaching, I was sort of intentional about when providing feedback, telling students, you should consider this artifact for the portfolio. And I think it's something that we also need to incorporate as part of our pedagogical and teaching practices. It should also, I think one of the merits of the portfolio, if you wish, it is also the fact that it opens a dialogue too between faculty members and students through the reflections that I think Brenna indicated very nicely. It impacts later on, you know, interview preparation, acknowledging from the part of the students, oh, I knew and I acquired knowledge about this, and somebody else also noticed it, and I should include in my resume, or this is, while I write a reflection, for example, this is something that it's so interesting to incorporate in my future professional practice. So, and I'm going to shut my mouth and open to my other colleagues.
Guess that would be me. I just want to say thanks for your interest, everyone. One of the things that I learned in the transitioning of the process, because I was in the former comprehensive exam model going into this portfolio, one thing that I noticed right away is that there seemed to be some sense of ownership from the student side in their culminating experience. And so it wasn't necessarily us dictating to them, this is what you should know at the end of the program. They had the opportunity to let us know how they felt with regards to the program experiences. And so as a faculty member, that was interesting to see what kind of artifacts was submitted. And one thing I want to say, we weren't like regrading the assignment. We were looking at the artifact, yes, but we were more paying attention to how did the student interpret that particular assignment to their professional development, personal development sometimes. That's what we were looking for. So I thought that was interesting that the students took ownership. Brenna mentioned this and Dr. Silvestri mentioned this too. One thing that I'm doing now as a faculty member when I teach master's courses is to highlight assignments that could be possibly a future artifact, which is, from a faculty perspective, is really a great opportunity to have students further engage in your course, and possibly, hopefully, that student can communicate questions if they want to have the highest quality assignment for your class, but possibly an artifact. So I think as we continue moving onward, our program's going to benefit because, you know, our students are doing assignments, you know, putting their best effort in, knowing that it could possibly be used. And then lastly, I think it provides a more positive framework. You know, exams tend to have that perception of all or nothing. This went away from that. And so I hope that our future students realize that this is only for their benefit for the future and present.
Forrest, do you want to say anything?
I'll say something just real quickly. Sorry, I would show you my face, but I'm in the car traveling right now, so that would probably be scary for everyone. But I guess one, just echo the things that you said. I appreciate my colleagues in doing this. I think the reflection piece is what's so important to me. You know, there's no substitute for giving an opportunity for students and us to reflect on learning, and I'm not sure exams do that. And so I think that this has been an important opportunity to hear what students find beneficial. You know, I think several of my colleagues have already mentioned the value, the importance, the interest. I mean, the opportunity in seeing what students select as their artifact. And I think sometimes what we think may be a beneficial learning experience might not be what the student identified as a learning opportunity or experience. So I think it's interesting to see. Or how we help, you know, when it,
Forrest, you've been cutting off, so
He
I
must
think
be
we
in
might.
the copper.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry. I'll just hang it up there. You're all doing great. Wonderful.
Okay, thanks. I know that I've been following some of the chat stuff, so I've gotten a couple of private messages as well, but I thought it was, there was one really good question from a faculty perspective. How does advising or reviewing ePortfolios count for a faculty teaching load? And did or do you calibrate reviews and grading expectations amongst faculty? So in our department, it counts as a general service. And we talked about that, you know, we talked about this is going to add some more to our load, and we're not necessarily getting credit for it per se, but we all decided that it was the right thing to do for our students, that we're invested in them, and we want to make sure that they're learning from our program and they're getting what they need out of it, and that we can also pinpoint that we do the job that we do, whether good or bad, that this is what we do and this is the information we have that demonstrates that. And so even though it doesn't necessarily count for us in any special way towards our teaching load, it does mean something to us personally. And so we decided we're going to take it on. Obviously, that's a choice that everybody has to make. And we have enough faculty to do that. So did we calibrate reviews and grading expectations amongst faculty? We talked about it in the beginning, kind of what makes an unacceptable response. So some people have been asking about the, you know, what do we measure it on the rubrics? I've attached two files. One is the portfolio overview, which has our rubric, which is a very simple, unacceptable and acceptable. We're not trying to, you know, cure cancer. We just want them to give us a good product. And if they don't, then it's unacceptable and we'll send it back for rewrites. But if they do, then it's in the acceptable category and we just move on. So if we're calibrating it, we really just talked about what is unacceptable. And that's kind of how we got our rubric category of unacceptable. So we designed all that together based on, and you'll see the 7 CAS outcomes that we're using. So we did sit down and talk about that before we started the process with the students. And then we did some check-ins during that first evaluation round and saying, okay, this is what I'm seeing. Are you seeing that? How are you handling this? So we are touching base through the process itself. Had another question. I work in one faculty member program, and I'm very sorry. I definitely know how that goes. You have everything on your shoulders. Do you recommend asking adjunct faculty to assist in this effort? A lot of our adjuncts are actually working professionals. They're in the field already. And I think it would be appropriate to certainly ask them to do that. I mean, they have a great lens to look at. It's not just a faculty lens, it's a professional, you know, in the field right now lens. And so if they're willing to do it, I would absolutely ask them to do it. It helps to have, you know, a little bit more of a mentorship with students and having someone who can serve in that role. And my personal philosophy is about workload and not trying to overwhelm everyone. And so, you know, if workload is a problem, then this may not be the exact process for you. It is one that we thought we could take on with the amount of faculty that we have. So we have that ability. And I think that was all the questions that we had posted. Does anyone have any other questions for any one of us who have been speaking today?
Heidi, I've got an assessment question. So how,
Okay.
how do you envision assessing this and taking, like, how are you going to gather some data and evidence of student learning across the program for program outcomes, for accreditation and everything else you need to do institutionally?
Yeah, so one of the things that it brought up, the whole creation of the portfolio process really came from a program review we just got done doing about 2 years ago. And I was writing that process, and there's a lot of things in our university program review. It's a very long report that we have to write. A lot of things about curriculum outcomes. How do you know you're meeting your outcomes? You know, the evidence-based stuff. And so we would pull in CAS and say, these are the things that we follow. These are the standards in our field. This is why we're making these just types of decisions. And we could only guess at some of the outcomes, you know, with our comprehensive exam approach, because we weren't getting the kind of data that was really useful. And so we would say, you know, hey, after, you know, the initial submission of their exam and 2 rewrites, you know, everybody passed. But, you know, it doesn't really capture the learning. And so this I see as really being able to demonstrate what our students are learning by not only the artifact piece that they choose for 7 different outcomes that also go back to CAS standards. And we can demonstrate that, yes, we're following the standards and we're meeting them, you know, and here's our student evidence. You know, I also think it's good for us to be able to do long-term over a 6-year process, you know, what are those outcomes? How are students explaining their learning in those outcomes? How are they applying it professionally? Because that is our goal, to have them go out into the workforce. So I see both short-term and long-term benefits to the assessment. Our system using TK20, we're able to run those reports and we're able to pull out individual artifacts. So any reviewers we have in the future, whether it's our accreditation process or just a program review process that we go through, they're going to be able to tap into that system. They can get access to it with their own accounts and do a sample of our students and their artifacts. And so we'll have a variety of different ways that we can use that data to demonstrate how we are or not meeting outcomes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There are a couple questions in the chat. John Lowry asked about, do you connect the CAS outcomes to the ACPA and NASPA competencies?
We don't directly. We talked about that. A lot of our courses are already kind of set up that way. And we talk more in depth about the competencies in our practicum course. And so that's kind of a standard approach that all the practicum courses have. And we hope that they'll make those connections too, but we're not specifically asking about them in the portfolio. It just seemed to us too much to take on. We wanted to really focus on the learning and the curriculum as our outcomes. But you could certainly do that approach.
And then Forrest posted a question about is there a possibility of the role for portfolios in students' future applications for doctoral programs?
Well, I certainly see it, but I can open that up to anyone else who might want to comment.
Anybody else have thoughts? I mean, it certainly seems like it could be some evidence as part of the application process. Students could choose to share, you know, some of their artifacts, or depending on how the platform's set up, if they can give access to folks outside of your system. I'm not sure if your portfolio system allows that or not, but some do. So that could be an option as well.
Yeah, I don't believe that TK20 allows that. It's more an internal assessment system for reporting standards. The teacher prep program at our college wanted to use it because it directly allows reporting for the state standards that they have to meet. And so it's not necessarily an external software. But I mean, I think there's other portfolio systems out there that you could tap into. A lot of career centers have something that can be used. And so if you can find out what's used on your campus, you may not have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
You might be able to create at least an access point for your students, so that maybe they can share it externally with employers after they've created it for you. So that might be one possibility.
And my guess is students will still have access to the artifacts, and I'm assuming they probably did their reflection in Word before they uploaded it. So they would have access to all those documents. And for the folks on the phone, John Lowry made a comment about there's possible concern that students might be less likely to share those less successful artifacts in that process. So some pros and cons to those options and those thoughts. Other questions or comments for folks?
One thing I wanted to mention too is concerning the previous question with doctoral programs. One thing that I think all of us do in our fully online program is to make sure our students recognize that their technical skills, especially, you know, Brenna, you've done podcasts. I know you've done them in my class. You know, being able to use screencasting, being very familiar with LMS systems. I know when I did my resume review for my students, if their resumes didn't include, especially those technical skills that come from being a fully online student, I made sure to mention that. And I think if students are going into a doctoral program, I think that would be a valuable asset, in my opinion, to know that, you know, our fully online students may be 2-3 steps ahead when it comes to using technology in the learning environment.
I got a couple of private questions that I wanted to share. Can you talk a little more about how you use CAS standards in your process to implement Institute the ePortfolios? CAS was really a guide, you know, what outcomes do we want to see? The CAS standards themselves don't go into a lot of depth because it's applicable to every program. And so it's up to the programs to determine how those outcomes are measured. And how we cover them in classes and the curriculum. So it was primarily identifying which of the outcomes we wanted. Some of the curriculum areas of foundational and professional studies go into a lot of description in the CAS standards, so we had to tease out which outcome we specifically wanted. So there might be a couple of different outcomes in a particular topic area, and we had to choose which one that we thought we wanted for the curriculum itself. So that's really how we use CAS as a guide to how we structured the entire portfolio and how we measured it. Let's see, also, are there some lessons learned or things faculty should consider when using CAS standards to design and or improve the ePortfolio experience for students? I really think that the lessons learned for us is that CAS is applicable to what we're doing. It really just depends on your program itself, how it is designed and implemented. But using the outcomes is a great way to provide that basis for the curriculum. Now, if we're looking at the CAS standards for the different functional areas, that in itself could be an assignment that you would do in class. So if you have a student who wants to work in student activities, you know, having them, you know, for an assessment class, for instance, review their CAS standards in student activities and do a review of the program they work in or the assistantship that they have, that might be a good way to incorporate some other CAS standards into it. We were primarily looking at the curriculum for master's program standards. And I know the CAS organization has a lot of webinars that have been done and are upcoming about that kind of topic, about doing coursework assignments around CAS. And so if that was more what your question was, you might be able to find some additional resources with the CAS organization. We also have a question: how do you identify artifacts around non-disciplinary outcomes, such as intercultural competence, working in diverse teams, resolving conflict? Is that primarily through reflections, and are ePortfolios fully intended to be internal versus external website for their own use? So we already kind of addressed the internal versus external website. We're not actually identifying artifacts, so we're leaving that up to the students. But in terms of some of these other competencies, they will blend in with the outcomes that we're looking for. For instance, there is an outcome for CAS about student characteristics and advising interventions for individual students and groups, and those types of broad outcomes, and students can talk more about what they learned. I know Brenna did, and you can look at her reflection statement that she graciously shared. I took out some identifiers so that you wouldn't know more about her actual institution that she was working at. But she did talk about in that reflection statement about some of those competencies that she was able to enhance through that artifact and process of producing that artifact. And so I think some of those competencies come through, but you could design the ePortfolio process around talking about some of those competencies, the ones you find most important for your program. Let's see. It looks like somebody shared a syllabus for workload strategy. I'm going to be downloading that in here too.
Yeah, a lot of great feedback and suggestions in the comments.
Yeah.
I appreciate folks sharing their knowledge and their tools that way. Anything else as we wrap up? Any other comments or questions? Well, I do want to thank Peggy, Brenna, Gabriella, Rick, and Forrest for sharing their experiences and their thoughts. It's been really helpful. As I mentioned, we are recording this, so I'll send out the link later today or tomorrow for folks. And keep your eye out for more CAS resources for faculty and grad students. We'll be posting those through the CSP Talk listserv. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.